Second. Any corrections, comments?
Not very often.
If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Our regular agenda, first item is a special use permit. To consider a special use permit for an existing non-conforming lot to be rebuilt upon as required by section 39.11.003 of the City of Dickinson zoning ordinance. The site is located at 537 2nd Avenue East and is additionally described as the east 101 feet of Lot 2, Block 38 of the original City of Dickinson plat. The site originally had a home that burned down, and the owner, Armando Nunez, would like to replace it at this time. Walter?
Yes, I believe the applicant is here, Mr. Chairman, and he could explain if you had any questions on the staff review or would like to field any questions
Would
from you.
the person presenting like to come forward? Morning. Would you state your name?
Armando Nunez.
Okay, thank you.
Like it said, the lot had previously a house on it. It did burn down, and we're looking to reconstruct the house on the property, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home. Then basically covering on the lot, but within the requirements of the city for the setbacks and all the requirements for the improvements that are required for construction.
All right, thank you.
Armando, you read through the staff review. Do you have any questions on the conditions of approval?
No, I've gone through the conditions. They're pretty normal conditions for construction.
Does the board have any questions for Armando? Walter, do you have any comments?
I do. This is obviously a process that we require this and other applicants, and we will have a few others coming down the pike in the future. It is a good reuse of an existing platted town site lot that obviously had been altered throughout the years. You see in your packet there is a pretty good photo. It will fit in. It does, as the applicant stated, they will be meeting all the setback requirements, all of our current standards for coverage and whatnot. So it is a good reuse and infill for the existing part of the city. So with that, with the conditions of approval, staff would recommend approval.
All right, thanks, Walter. Any other comments?
We didn't.
No comments?
Public comments.
Anybody in the public that would like to comment? If none, thank you. Is there a motion?
I move the Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the Armando Nunez Special Use Permit Petition SUP-001-16, subject to the conditions listed above as meeting of all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second the motion.
A motion and a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll move on to our second agenda item. It's a preliminary plat to consider a preliminary replat of Fisher's Second City East Edition for Lot 1, Block 1 by Prairie Gold Real Estate, LLC, for the creation of Lot 1A, Block 1 to incorporate an existing adjacent parcel to create a parcel of 8.18 acres in size. The site is situated at Kilder Mountain Manufacturing at 1700 I-94 Business Loop in Dickinson. The party presenting, please come forward.
Good morning. Steve Rude with Advanced Engineering on behalf of Kilder Mountain Manufacturing. I think it's, Kilder Mountain Manufacturing would like to expand their operation, and I think there's a site plan in your package that shows how the site is kind of situated right now and what their future plans are, and and we need to aggregate the two parcels into one in order to accommodate their growth. And I'll answer any questions you might have.
Does anybody have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, yes. Steve, could you address, I know you had a correspondence back and forth with me on the conditions of approval. Are we clear on those now? or
Yes, we are.
everyone's-
Yeah. Item 5 could have been read a couple ways, but we got that. I figured I knew what you meant. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? If none, Walter, do you have any comments?
I do have a brief one. We have had some discussions on the proper format of this plat, and I'll call it format just because we may need to change the name of it because the intent of the replatting process may not be met by calling it a replat because we're actually incorporating a non-platted piece of property in with an existing platted piece of property. That was pointed out. Gene and I had some discussions. I believe Steve's aware of that. I would suggest that before this comes back to final plat approval, that get resolved, and we'll just work it out internally with Craig and myself and Steve for the applicant. So,
They might show up with a different name someday. That's about it.
And that's okay with you?
Works for us.
Okay.
This is the title you see here was I worked with the county recorder to come up with it, but I'm sure she doesn't care either, as long as we name it something that's unique, that's trackable in the public records.
All right. Anybody in the public that would like to comment? Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions by anybody on the board? If not, is there a motion?
Tim,
Yes.
move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the preliminary replat District Second City East subdivision, subject to the conditions listed above, and executing application materials as meeting all requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code, and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare, subject to the
We have a motion and a second. Any comments? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We'll move on to our item 3, to the zoning code amendments. To consider proposed amendments to the zoning text in the City of Dickinson Municipal Code, Chapter 39, zoning, under the following sections: 39.02, definitions 39.03, use types 39.04, zoning district regulations 39.06, supplemental use regulations 39.07, supplemental site development regulations 39.08, landscaping screening standards 39.10, sign regulations, and 39.12, administration and procedures. Walter or Steve? Okay.
Good morning, Commissioner. Steve Josephson, City County Planner. And you have before us there a number of proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance, and we had walked through these at a previous meeting and gotten direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission at that time to at least proceed with these, and these based upon some comments that we had. Mr. Chair, how do you want to go through here? Do you just want to walk through these one at a time and discuss them, or is that what you would prefer to do? We can do that, if you so like.
What would the board like? You want to go individually on each one?
It may be worth the discussion.
It probably needs to be done that way. so
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so for the first one, which was section 39.02.006, let's see. And all that does is in that section, it says that either the building official or the planning director can sign off on the certificate of zoning compliance. It allows either of them, to, to do so. And that's in the building process. Either one can say, yes, this complies with the current zoning. The next one is the elimination of the creative subdivision. The last time that the county, of the definition, the last time the city commission acted on the zoning ordinance, they eliminated in a different section the discussion of creative subdivision, and this is because there's nothing in the subdivision regs about this, so this is just a cleanup and getting rid of the definition of it. The next thing after that is actually having a definition of a communications tower. This typically would be what we refer to as a cell tower. In the next section about non-conforming sign.
Steve?
Yes, go ahead.
If I could, so if somebody comes in with a subdivision that somebody might call a creative subdivision, do we have a way to approve something like that? It would have to be a PUD, I suppose.
We don't, well, we never had anything in our subdivision regulations to begin with.
Okay, but could it occur as a PUD?
We could do it as a planned unit development.
Okay.
I should say, rather, the planned unit development would reflect, the subdivision would reflect that.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. This is a definition of a communications tower, typically a cell tower. You've had a few of those come before you, and this is just updating the code to have some current language as you would find elsewhere. The next one is, it currently says for zoning administrator that and the building official may be used interchangeably, and those are two distinct positions. For residential use types, it says two-family residential, which is allowing 2 dwelling units on one lot, and that's not even something that I've seen. I don't believe that's even permitted under our current code, especially when we have a definition of saying that 1 lot, 1 dwelling unit. For the next one, for civic types, that's just adding a line saying that a communication tower in this code is considered a miscellaneous use type and not a utility use type. And then you go down to the 2 miscellaneous use types, and that it changes it to the definition of communications tower.
Steve?
Yes.
Not to interrupt. Just going back to item 2 and 3902 and 29. Didn't we have staff have concern about taking the building official out?
For which one was that?
Zoning administrator.
Do you care to address that one?
I think what we did was we kept it in the one location, but there's portions of the code that specifically call out where they would need to work with planning staff or myself, and for special use permits, let's say, that was an example. Remember, we exempted including Leonard in that, and I don't believe Leonard wants to be involved in that.
Oh, okay.
So there were a few locations in the code that there were references made to that, and it's not typically something that Leonard wants to be involved with or is involved with.
Okay,
So-
I just wanted to, I remember that conversation a little bit, so.
Right.
All right, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. And a lot of the duties of the zoning administrator are not actually, they're done in planning. Thank you. When we have purposes of zoning districts, there was a reference in agricultural districts where it says land included in the urban reserve in the comprehensive development plan. This may have referred to a previous comprehensive plan because our current comprehensive plan doesn't address urban reserves. So by removing this, it just makes it compliant with, it just makes it consistent with our comprehensive plan. Also, if we move to R2 zoning, there's in the definition of, in the purpose of it, it talks about providing special regulations to encourage innovative forms of housing development. And again, I think that came out of a previous code. The regulations in the code are fairly specific in terms of what's permitted in terms of single family and multifamily. If we go now to the definition of downtown commercial district, where it says mixed uses are encouraged, in fact, they are permitted. As you can see downtown, we have buildings that have both residential and commercial in it. Our next one, which is on page 6 of your document, is just removing that definition of two-family residential uses. On page 7, it's changing broadcast tower to communications tower. And then I'll draw your attention to page 8, because there had been a fair amount of discussion. This had to do with the single-family attached and single-family detached, with the adding in, making a specification between the two. The single-family attached is where you have the two structures with a common wall, and they're meant to be set, on separate lots. And it's proposed that in all 3 residential zoning districts, that the minimum lot size would be 45 feet, and that the minimum lot length would be 45, width would be 45 feet, and the minimum lot size would be 4,000 square feet. And I believe that came out of our discussion at the last planning and zoning meeting. Going to page 9, one of those is just where it talks about garden centers. There is no section 804 in our code. That may have been something previous. That's actually in Article 39.08. And then we also added in for residential uses, just specified what's in the table about the single family attached.
Steve?
Yes.
I had just a quick question going back to page 7. The table showing permitted or special uses. When we changed the communications tower from broadcast tower, the definition of a communications tower is that it's a structure in a non-residential zone, but it's allowed by special use.
It is allowed by special use.
So why does the definition specifically call it out in a non-residential zone if it is, in fact, allowed by special use in a...
We'll change that definition.
Okay, I just want to, there's two uses where it isn't permitted.
Yeah, good catch. Where is that?
So,
okay. Oh, GC. Okay. Okay, and I don't understand why it's not in those. We can add that in. Okay, go ahead.
On the downtown commercial, I do have one comment on that we might want to consider for the future, is that we all see the tower downtown. With our infill of a plan that we're looking to do in maximizing the development downtown, it probably isn't a great place to actually promote those. More typical is on the top of the buildings. We're looking at maybe a 6-story height restriction. Right now, there's no height restriction downtown. Just to get some design standards and get some infill in there. In the long term, we're looking at a height limitation of 6 stories, and we may want to not include towers in the downtown district. So just something to think about there.
Or what I might propose is that if we look in the downtown area, you could do a stealth design where something is actually attached to an existing structure, and it blends into it, so you wouldn't necessarily have a separate tower setting on a separate lot, but you could have something that is actually sits on an existing, and blends in and doesn't tower over the rest of things. So we still may want to continue that as a special use, and then in the future come up with some, say that in DC zoning, that would be what would be encouraged. Okay. And if you go to page 10, there is some language in there. Oh, go ahead.
I got a question on page 9.
Okay.
Before we get, on 390603, the item number 3, the minimum side yard opposite the common wall shall be equal to twice the normal required side yard. If we're making the lot sizes a minimum 45, we're going to, now, in the past, we've never enforced this. We've always done the 6 feet. Is our intention to go 12 feet now?
I think that was some previous language that was in there. Let's look at that language and interpret it.
That has never been enforced that I can ever remember. On single family, well, whatever we want to call them now. Maybe somebody from building is here. Jim, maybe you got a comment on that?
Yeah, actually it was in the book, written as if you put it together, you take that setback and put it to the outside. I kind of, when I got here, it was being done that way, so I do most of the permits, so I kept on doing it that way because that was the way it was being done. I didn't think I could stop midstream and just start saying, but
So
I agree with you.
Are we requiring the 12 feet or not? I mean, is that how
I'm not. I mean, I'm still doing it by when I came in here, that's the way it was being done.
I would concur that we would need to decide if we aren't going to follow this, we need to strike it from our standards. If it's something that the commission wants to do and move forward, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying I am agreeing that we need to make this reflect what we actually are enforcing and what the community actually wants.
Having an attached house, I'm glad that I don't have 6 more feet to mow, I'll be honest with you, but that's just me.
Well, my concern is if we're going to add that 12 feet in, then the minimum lot sizes are, I mean, it kind of contradicts each other, so.
I don't have a direction one way or another. I think that we can make it work with the way it's been working. It seems to work out on the field, on the ground.
Yeah.
But we need to strike it from here.
All right. So we're good.
And you're okay with that, Walter?
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions or problem with that?
I mean, I think it's been being done since, I mean, I've been building here 20 years and I don't ever remember it being enforced, so.
Then I would say we should strike that.
Okay. Okay, for convenience storage, and this came up, this came up as a variance where we had a case of, convenience storage being against another property that was also zoned limited industrial. Our current convenience storage requires that there's got to be a buffered, there's got to be a landscape buffer to other property lines. And the proposed language is that we have a buffered, that the landscape buffer be from 20 feet from adjacent property lines if the adjacent properties are of a less intensive zoning district. It didn't seem to make sense that if you have something that's limited industrial and you're doing it against limited industrial, to have that landscape buffer between the two of them, because the uses are the same.
I would agree with the intent of the change, but do we define landscaped buffer yards?
We do in our landscaping portion.
Okay. So somebody doing this will know what he has to do.
Yes, it happened during the site planning process. This is correcting a typo in 39.06.007 where it says performance standards in the GI zoning district, and currently it says limited instead of general, so that's a correction of a typo, or at least as far as we could tell. And then we added in there that all discharge of sewer and waste into public sewer shall comply with all applicable city ordinances. Okay, and then moving on to the next page where we have storage of chemical products. We currently have this under limited industrial, but we don't have this under general industrial. And this has been a standard that the city has been using for special use permits for any chemical storage. And quite honestly, in limited industrial, you're not going to find chemical storage of chemical products under limited industrial anyway. It's actually applicable to the general industrial zoning district. So we have this on the books, we just don't have it. This is really where it's supposed to be, is under general industrial. And you've had a couple of cases of people who've come forward with special use permits, and this has been the standard that's been used in terms of the amount of gallons, gallons on a piece of property less than an acre, and also the number of gallons per tank, and also the separation from any residential or commercial zoning district and any habitable structures, and that means offices as well as any place where there's people, as well as actual residences. Moving down to the next section, this is just a clarification about permitted accessory uses. We have private garages and parking for residential use as accessory, and then we just added language in there saying that no garage can be constructed on residential lot without an existing primary residential structure.
If I own a lot next to my house?
Where you could combine, and you have a house on it, you can
Yeah.
combine the lots.
Okay.
Yeah, that process is there.
Right above it says it's got the structures on the same lot. And one says the same lot. I mean, it wouldn't be the same lot though.
Yes, it would, yes.
After you combine them.
After you combine them, it would be the same lot.
Okay.
We have a process, a lot combination.
Yeah, it's an administrative process, and it's
Okay.
relatively painless.
All right.
And we've seen that where people have come to us and they've said, I own the lot next to me, can I build this here? And it's, let's just combine the lots and that'll work.
I think the intent, and I think you can appreciate that, let's say Cook's 4th and 5th, if someone wanted to buy 4 or 5 lots out there, what it's meant to do is not allow them to build garages out there and have no intention of building the primary use, which is a home. That's the idea.
And we have had people call us and say, well, I intend to move on to this lot sometime in the future, but can I put a garage here and store stuff? And they never move on. They never move on to the lot. So essentially, it's not functioning it's not a residential lot, which is the purpose of it. In the next section where we talk about outdoor storage outside of the GI zoning district, and we had discussed this at the last workshop, was putting a limitation of, of how much outdoor storage you can do for a commercial use type. We've had a few situations where someone has a commercial use type use on the property, and most of the rest of the lot has been turned into open storage. So this is just a clarification that the open storage is permitted if the area where open storage takes place is less than 25% of the building footprint. The next section would be, this is new language, this would be the language used for communication towers, and commissioners, you've seen this language come in front of you when we've had special use permits. One thing that we put in here was the setback of the tower, where we're proposing that the setback distance from any non-residential structure or roadway would be 1.25 times the height of the tower. And that from a residence, any habitable residence, the setback would be 1.75 times the height of the tower. And I know this has come up a couple of times where we've had proposed cell towers that were near, and there was residential housing nearby. Typically, it was further away than this, but this at least sets a limit. It sets a limit and says that the tower has to be it sets a limit as far as how far the tower has to be set back from, from existing structures and roadways. Sure.
Sorry to keep interjecting, but this is a good example of some standards that we're going to look at the ordinance and go ahead and start putting in some set standards. And I know Craig and I have talked about that a number of times, and I think the board has had some discussions that we're going to put in some standards that are baseline standards that are a little higher, and they're continually conditions of approval that we've looked at in the past, and so we're going to include those in our standards so that will, not only the applicants will know up front, it's a little more clear to them, but it also gives us a baseline of what to show people when they come in with those kind of applications. So you'll see this subdivision ordinance. I know Craig and I have visited a number of times on that. We're going to have a number of these types of conditions and, if you will, standards that are going to make kind of a boilerplate baseline design plan for people coming in doing development. So this is kind of a good example of what we're moving toward. So, thanks.
Thanks, Walter.
I'm going to let you address the next one about buffer yard provisions, since that was your language.
The next one, it talks about buffer yard shall take precedent over building setback closer to the property line. So, I mean, what this is if you have, let's say, a 15-foot setback, but you have a buffer yard that's a 30-foot buffer yard, obviously you would have to include and put in the 30-foot buffer yard. It doesn't exempt you because you meet the 15-foot setback. So if you have a spacing or buffer that's required in that area, we would administer and require that buffer yard on top of, so it would be in excess of the actual setback. So it's a higher standard, if you will. If we require a buffer in there, there's a reason we require it, and it's usually to screen the use or buffer the use from an adjacent property. If the setback is smaller than that, we will go with the buffer yard. So does everybody understand, follow that? There's a reason that we have that buffer yard in place, and it's basically so that if it's a non-compatible use, it gives you enough area to actually buffer that, where the setbacks may not do that for you.
give us an example of when we would do that?
One recently would be the fairgrounds, where we required the tree rows and that kind of buffer area between the residents and the fairgrounds development. And, you know, it wound up being much greater than what the setback actually was for, you know, and if they were going to put that, in that particular case, they don't necessarily have a structure there, but it was a self-imposed buffer by our special use permit process because of a concern from a neighboring property owner. So we can either use it that way or we can use it, let me see, another example would be Thrifty White, the new one down on Villard. On their west side, they actually are going to be planting, they're not there yet, but they're actually going to be doing some tree planting and shrub buffering to the property that they're very close to the west. So that's a little smaller version of it, and it definitely is greater than their setback. So that's one I can think of off the top of my head. Right.
A housekeeping item on the buffer yard provisions. We referenced two-family, which I believe we struck from the code as a definition that we're not using anymore, so
Right.
get rid of that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Well, then if that's, okay, it has single family, so that could be attached or detached. The next ones deal with you know, with the sign ordinance. So we have adopted a pylon sign in which the base of the sign is actually above, it's actually above ground. And the intent of the pylon sign is, as opposed to a pole sign, was that that everything above ground be covered, including the poles. And this is just a clarification saying the visible support structures for pylon signs shall be enclosed. Another section in here about general site and street graphics is that just putting something in there saying that signs located on properties located within the corridor overlay district may be subject to additional design standards consistent with the purpose of the corridor overlay district. We had under prohibited signs, it originally said projected signs within the downtown commercial zoning district would be prohibited. Well, that's the sign of favor downtown, and actually they've worked out pretty well. Plus, we now have a new ordinance that, I don't know if that governs that over the sidewalks. So we're eliminating that. They've worked out well. What we have seen in some cases where people have put up banner signs on the side of buildings and have used those as permanent signs, and proposing that that banners as wall signs be prohibited. We allow them as temporary signs. But it's just the prohibition of those as a permanent sign.
This is another example of a standard that was in place similar to the side yard that we not necessarily embraced, not only from the community but also from staff and politically. There's obviously a few projecting signs downtown, and it is a good way of providing signage in the downtown area. So this really is there's a need, and people actually want to put these on there, and they're not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, and
it's more of a cleanup.
One of the things we discussed at the last meeting that came up were those cases where somebody has moved into a place and they want to put up a temporary ground sign, but they start their business in the wintertime, and there's no way that they can install it. So this is a provision saying that temporary signs may, if there's no permanent sign there, that a temporary sign may be allowed for 60 days or until the installation of the permanent sign, whichever comes first. And that 60-day period may be extended by the planning director if extenuating circumstances exist.
So does that 60 days apply to when you went back to banner signs as well, temporary?
Well, no, this is something different.
Okay.
This would be a ground sign.
Okay.
So say I want to put in a business and I want to put up like a 20-foot pole sign, but I start my business in the wintertime, there's no way I can do construction. So this is saying you can put a temporary ground sign there, and you've seen those skid signs. So they can get a permit for that as long as, for 60 days or until they build the ground sign. But given our circumstances here in weather, regarding weather, the planning director can go ahead and extend that out. And then one thing that we haven't covered are those little on-site directional signs. You've seen them where you come onto the site and it shows you, how to get around it on it. And this is just putting some language, and this is standard language that other local governments have about the size of them, and the number of them. And then we come to the special use permit, and this was something that we had discussed about, that the application is actually filed with the planning director or designee. And then we added some language in there that at a minimum, this is the following information, and then also captured in there that the submittal checklist that shows our current process for submitting applications. And the same is true too with zoning map amendments. And you'll see that on page 16.
You can see that we emphasize the agency checklist that we have. It is our backbone of our organization now as far as submittals. Depending on what the application is, like today, the applications that came through the door, they were a couple of the first applications that actually started working on that. Did quite a good job as far as pulling them together. It makes a much clearer project for them, and it makes it much clearer for them as far as what they need to propose to us and then give to you. It also alleviates usually the need for any of other staff time, whether it be fire or whoever, to attend these meetings and provide input, unless it's some big issue that we need them to clarify, but because they've already sat across the table from them and gotten their approval before they get here. So it has changed the complexion of how we do things, and it has expedited it, not only for us, but for the public. It does make a little more work for the public up front. It definitely does do that. But I think, and Steve just left, but he could attest to the fact that it is a little more work, but it's easier for him to do a little more work then than it is 2.5 months into the project, and trying to get an entitlement. So, so we keep emphasizing that in this.
The public finds out what they have to do. Say if we're going to have some child care applications coming in next month, I think we're going to have a couple of them, and in cases like that, those folks will know before they come through with their special use permit all the other steps that they're going to have to go through, instead of getting into it, getting their approval, and then it's a surprise and they find out that there's more than they anticipated. And then in terms of protest, that's the process right now. Is if someone protests an amendment, from the planning commission decision, then it does go to the city administrator. It's submitted to the city administrator. So that just clarifies that. And those are our proposed amendments. Some of them are cleanup, and some of them are updates, and some of them are adding some new things to respond to issues that we've had. And we're here to have any comments. We'll take those proposed changes, and make them. So we're looking to the commission, and also, it doesn't look like there's anybody here from the public, but this is a public hearing, so.
Well, thanks, Steve and Walter. Does anybody on the commission have comments or suggestions? You or Walter or Steve had any other comments?
The only thing I can say, and it's just a general comment, is that we are going to look at probably an every other month, the way it looks like it's probably going to work, hearing process in front of you for some amendments. You know, one big one that we're going to have to schedule when we don't have many applications coming in, our application numbers are actually going up. So you're going to see more applicants coming through the door, so that also makes it a little more of a challenge to with our expedited process, it does make it a little more of a challenge to bring those change items to you. So we're going to pick, when we have a little busier agenda, we'll bring you a few items to discuss. On agenda days when we have one item or no items, or, you know, a small number of items, we'll bring the subdivision ordinance in, because that really is probably going to take a little bit of discussion, and probably a couple of months worth of discussion. You know, Craig and I have worked on some proposed amendments already as far as standards, but I think that, you know, there's a whole discussion on bonding, improvements, what type of improvements are going to be put in the ground first, the whole discussion of the sidewalk, kind of how that, you know, when that comes in and how we guarantee that. So, I mean, that's going to be a longer discussion, and it isn't necessarily going to be a difficult discussion. It's just going to be, we need to have the direction of what we want to do from your board, and then, you know, to represent the community, not only the builders, but also, let's say, the public, who now is living with some of the other directions that we've taken, you know, and whether it's sidewalks, or whether it's lights, or whether it's, you know, special assessments, or what have you. I mean, I think we just need to visit on those, have some sort of a direction, have a clear path, and then just change our subdivision ordinance to reflect that, and just move forward. I mean, this is a great opportunity for us to clean up some of these items that have been lingering. Like you said, you've been here for how long, Jason? And you know, there's been items, I think, that have been lingering, and whether it's, you know, they just weren't as important, or, you know, and then we got really busy. But this is a great time to address them, and I would once again ask that if you have any portions of our code, any part of it, that you would like to discuss and possibly amend, please bring it up. Or if someone comes to you, you know, someone watches this on TV and they say, hey, you know, we have a concern on this. Bring it, let's talk about it. I mean, it may not mean that we change it. Just because, you know, someone brings something up doesn't necessarily mean that the city commission is going to change it. But this is the opportunity to actually have those things come to the podium, be discussed, we consider it, make a recommendation, and the city commission has the opportunity to approve it or deny it. So this is a great opportunity this year to do that, because when we're busy with larger developments as they're coming in, and here in the near future, it's a little more difficult to do that. So.
And from our discussion, commissioners, there are a number of items here where we've responded to comments, or just situations that we've seen in the past that, you know, that maybe didn't work all that well.
All right, thanks, Steve. Walter?
Thank you.
Is there any other business to come before the commission?
Do you want to go ahead and make a recommendation at this point, or
On the
do you want us
proposed
to come
changes?
back, or?
Do you need a motion on that?
Yes.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the proposed changes
As amended?
as amended? We have a motion, is there a second? Motion and second. Any discussion?
We're gonna make that, strike those items we discussed, the lot setback.
Yes, with the motion should include with the discussed changes.
Is that okay?
With discussed.
Okay. We're okay with motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Any other business?
The only thing I have to add is, thanks for tolerating the confusion with the urban forestry thing. I think it will pay off for the community, though. I think that, and I think there is going to be a good tie between the Planning Commission and the urban forestry direction. I mean, because honestly, what we do if it's a subdivision that comes through the door, we actually are going to be the ones that look at it, review it. It gives them the opportunity to be involved, but we are actually the ones that are going to be looking at it and saying, hey, we need some boulevard trees. We need to have these things improved. We're going to bond for them. We're going to make sure that they show up at some point in time. So we in essence are an arm of the Urban Forestry Board anyway. I think it'll take a few months, and I don't know what kind of participation we will get. We will always solicit people to be involved in that, and it's, you know, we want the folks that were involved with that. Obviously, Craig was involved with it before, and he's pretty passionate about including it in his designs, which is great for the city. And I just think that it's a good fit, and it's a way that we can actually help Gary and Public Works help facilitate this. When I first started last year, I went to a few of the meetings and they just didn't have the attendance. They couldn't really move. And with including all of you folks, as we even miss a few people today, we can still conduct business. They couldn't. And so that's why we're doing it. So I thank you for your patience, and yes, it does delay our PZ matters 20 minutes or so, but we aren't going to have it every month, so it won't necessarily be an every month ordeal. So thanks for dealing with the confusion.
Not a problem. Anything else to come before the board? Anybody from the public? Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion second? Motion is second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, folks.